She looked like a dream carved from candlelight, the kind that flickers just before it burns out. Her dress, white as moonlit snow, trailed behind her like a ghost already in waiting. Laughter drifted through the hall. The scent of jasmine and rosewater hung heavy in the air, and somewhere, music promised forever. Everyone said she was glowing. No one noticed her hands trembling inside her sleeves. It was the kind of night every storybook ends with. The union of two families, the sealing of vows, the moment the world calls perfect. She smiled for the guests, for the cameras, for the promise she'd been told to believe in. When her husband leaned close, his whisper brushed her ear like a secret she wasn't ready to hear. The room erupted in cheers. Behind her smile, something small and frightened began to crack. Outside, fireworks bloomed against the dark, but inside her chest, something dimmed. They said she was lucky, married into wealth, into safety, into respect. But luck is a fragile thing when bought with silence. Every congratulation felt like a chain laid gently on her wrist. Every blessing, another stone upon her heart. When the candles began to melt low and guests began to fade, the music softened into echoes. The door to the bridal chamber closed with a sound too final for a celebration. Beyond that door, the world grew quiet. Only the faint rhythm of her heartbeat remained. Steady at first, then unsure. What happened next, no one truly saw. There were no witnesses, only walls that remembered. They said she screamed once, a short, sharp sound swallowed by night, and then nothing. The servants waited outside, exchanging glances, telling themselves it was normal, that the first night always carried nerves. But the silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something breaking. By dawn, the celebration was over. The house that had sparkled with laughter now smelled of incense and regret. The groom stood pale, his eyes avoiding the bed where she lay still, her face as calm as porcelain, untouched, yet gone. The bride, who had promised to live for love, had not survived to see the sun. The whispers began immediately. Some said her heart was too weak. Others swore she fainted and never woke. A few, in hushed corners, wondered if she had begged to stop, if her final breath was not of love but of pain. A night meant for union had ended in division. Joy turned to mourning, music to whispers, warmth to chill. Yet no one spoke of what they suspected. The family called it fate. The guests called it tragedy. But the walls knew better, because behind those closed doors, something darker than death had entered the room. Before she became a bride, she was just a girl who believed in happy endings. She grew up tracing hearts in the fog of her window, dreaming of a man who would love her gently, the way songs on the radio promised. Her laughter was small, but sincere, the kind that filled empty rooms and made her mother smile. She was taught to be kind, to obey, to keep her voice soft and her eyes lowered. Love, they said, would find her if she waited quietly enough. In her world, marriage wasn't a choice. It was a destiny, the only door a girl could walk through with her head held high. From the moment she could braid her hair, whispers of dowries and suitors filled her home. Her worth was measured not in dreams, but in how well she could serve, how silently she could endure. They told her that a good wife never complains, that pain is proof of purity, and that obedience is love. She watched other brides leave their homes wrapped in red silk and tears, returning only as framed photographs above family altars. No one spoke of what happened after the wedding drums faded. No one asked if they were happy. Silence was a tradition too, passed down from mother to daughter like an heirloom of suffering. Still, she dreamed. She imagined candlelight and laughter, not cages and rules. She wanted a husband who would see her, not own her. But hope can be a dangerous thing when the world has already written your story. The day her father announced her engagement, her heart fluttered with confusion, fear disguised as duty. She smiled, because that's what good daughters did. He was older, powerful, respected, the kind of man mothers pointed to when they said security. To the world, it was a perfect match. To her, it was a storm she didn't yet know how to name. Her friends envied her jewelry. None of them noticed the quiet tremor in her hands. The wedding was set quickly, before doubt could take root. The weeks leading up to it were a blur of rituals and rehearsals. She was told what to wear, how to walk, when to speak. "Your new life begins on that night," her aunt said softly, adjusting the veil. "Be brave, and don't disappoint your husband." But bravery, she learned, had a different meaning in their world. It wasn't about fighting. It was about enduring without protest. And as the wedding day drew closer, Her reflection in the mirror stopped looking like her own. She was too young to understand that innocence is not armor, it is an invitation, and when the door to her new life finally closed behind her, she wasn't stepping into love. She was stepping into expectation, and the pain it demanded in return. The drums still echoed in the courtyard when the final guests left. Laughter lingered in the air like smoke, faint, dying, unwilling to fade. The house glowed with the aftertaste of celebration. But behind one door, far from the music and the murmured goodbyes, the air had changed. It was heavier, stiller, as if the walls were holding their breath. The bride sat on the edge of the bed, her veil trembling like a living thing. The room was draped in red, the color of love or of warning. Candles flickered across the silk sheets, painting shadows that danced like restless ghosts. Every flame seemed to whisper, "It's too late to run." Outside, the servants laughed over leftover sweets. Someone played a tune on a flute. Inside, she waited, her hands twisted in her lap, cold against the jewelry she never asked to wear. The sound of footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate, certain. The latch turned. He entered without a word. The smell of wine followed him, thick and sharp. His eyes scanned her face, not with tenderness, but possession. The silence between them stretched, alive and hungry. She tried to speak, maybe a greeting, maybe a prayer, but her voice betrayed her. Only air escaped. He smiled then, but it was not kindness. It was victory. Outside, the music rose again, a final burst of celebration. The elders toasted to fertility, to family, to forever. Inside, the bride flinched as the door clicked shut, sealing her away from the world. The laughter outside became muffled, as though the walls themselves pitied her. She could hear her own heartbeat now, wild, frantic, unsteady. The shadows grew longer, pressing close. He whispered something she didn't understand, and the air filled with the sound of her breathing, shallow, breaking, pleading. The candles shivered. The flute outside stumbled to a stop, and then came a sound, a short, sharp cry, so faint that the musicians mistook it for wind, but the servants at the door heard. They froze, eyes meeting, and then looked away. No one would interfere. Not tonight. Minutes passed. Or hours. No one could say. Somewhere in the house, laughter turned to whispers. The music softened, uncertain. The night dragged on, heavy with unseen violence. Inside that red-draped room, something sacred was broken. Something the world would never name aloud. When the candles finally burned low, silence settled over the house like ash. The servants drifted to their quarters, pretending they hadn't heard the cries. The elders slept soundly, dreaming of grandchildren. And behind that locked door she lay still, her body curled like a child's, her face hidden beneath the veil she never lifted. Outside, dawn crept across the sky. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, touching the hem of her gown, and found no breath beneath it. By morning, the music had stopped, and so had her heart. Morning arrived too quietly, as if the sun itself feared what it would illuminate. The halls that had laughed and sung the night before now felt hollow, each room echoing the absence that no candle could chase away. Servants moved like shadows, whispering beneath their breath, glancing toward the bridal chamber with a mixture of fear and guilt. Outside, neighbors murmured rumors that would grow heavier with each telling. The groom's family gathered quickly, their faces masks of concern, yet their eyes betrayed calculation. How could they contain a scandal without staining the honor they had built so carefully? A doctor was summoned, and the explanations were swift. She had a weak heart, one whispered. A bad omen, suggested another. An unfortunate accident, offered a third. Each version drifted through the house, softening reality, reshaping horror into a story the world could bear. The bride's parents stood frozen, their grief tangled with shame. How had their daughter, raised with devotion and hope, vanished into silence so swiftly? Their questions faltered in the presence of power. The groom's family, influential and unchallenged, allowed no dissent. To speak too loudly would have been worse than silence. Their sorrow was private, their voices silenced by fear and custom. In the village, eyes darted but tongues stayed still. Traditions dictated respect for authority, and authority dictated obedience. Even those who suspected something darker hesitated, because in that world, a dead bride was less shameful than a disobedient one. No one dared challenge the ceremony that cloaked cruelty in gilded light. The truth remained locked behind the heavy door that had taken her life, just as the family locked their lips. The house itself seemed to mourn in silence. Curtains fluttered like whispered apologies. Chairs remained pulled back, untouched since the night before. Music had once spilled from these rooms, carrying hope and joy. Now, only the faint smell of jasmine lingered, clinging to walls and memories, haunting the hallways with what could not be spoken aloud. Yet beneath the calm veneer, subtle fractures formed. Servants avoided the bridal chamber. The groom's smile was tight, his steps careful, as though guilt had left a permanent mark beneath his practiced control. Guests nodded politely, raising cups of tea in honor, yet their eyes lingered on the empty space where she should have been, a ghost hovering at every corner of polite conversation. This was more than a tragedy. It was a system at work. Ceremony could mask horror. Tradition could shield cruelty. The family had traded honesty for honor, grief for appearances, and in doing so, had ensured that her story would be whispered, distorted, and nearly forgotten. In their world, a dead bride was less shameful than a disobedient one, and so the truth remained buried, dressed in silk, veiled by etiquette, and hidden behind doors that never opened again. Her story was not unique. Across continents and centuries, countless young brides vanished behind the doors of ceremonial expectation. In a village miles from here, a 16-year-old girl was found lifeless in her dowry room, the veil still clutched in her pale fingers. No one spoke of the hours before her death, only of her beauty and the unfortunate timing. In another town, a bride of barely 14 was said to have fainted repeatedly on her wedding night, and eventually never rose again, her family silent, the groom's lineage untouched by scandal. Historians who peered into old records found patterns that were hard to ignore. In one coastal region, arranged marriages ensured alliances, wealth, and property consolidation, but at the cost of young women's autonomy. Letters from grieving parents reveal a quiet terror, fear of shame, fear of reprisal, fear that questioning tradition would destroy them socially. Across borders, customs varied, but the outcome often did not. Purity, obedience, and submission were weaponized, transforming ceremonial innocence into a trap. Even in seemingly progressive courts, rituals masked brutality. Brides were presented like gifts, their consent assumed but rarely sought. A poet of the era described one girl's silence as more eloquent than any vow, hinting at the dread lurking behind the celebration. Oral histories tell of servants carrying whispers from locked chambers, of faint cries interpreted as nerves, of deaths recorded as fainting, illness, or divine misfortune. And when curiosity arose, it was swiftly silenced. The contrast is chilling. Outside, life continued with feasts, songs, and alliances strengthened. Inside, a young woman could be stripped of choice, dignity, and sometimes life. Families defended customs, communities excused tragedies, and history itself seemed to turn its eyes away. What they called tradition, centuries of ritual, expectation, and marriage as duty, history calls cruelty. These were not accidents. They were the predictable consequences of systems built to prioritize honor over humanity. The same patterns repeat across cultures, from dowries and virginity tests to rigid hierarchies that ensured obedience. The details differed, but the core remained. A girl's voice, fear, and suffering were subordinated to appearances, and those who wielded authority, fathers, husbands, elders, were shielded by law, ritual, and society's unwillingness to see. The more one digs, the more the archives bleed the same story. Young women offered in marriage, disappearing behind expectation, leaving only whispers in their wake. Each account is a shadow of the last, a reminder that what happened to one bride is never merely one story. It is a mirror of history's systemic violence, a cycle repeated with subtle variations across time and place. When we look at her life now, we see not a tragic accident, but a pattern, one that reaches beyond the walls of that single home, across generations and across continents. And it asks the same haunting question: if this has happened so many times, how many more have remained unseen, unheard, and unremembered? Her body lay quiet, pale beneath the shroud of silk, yet it spoke in ways no doctor dared transcribe. The autopsy, performed quickly and politely, offered no answers. The report read, "Cause of death unknown," a phrase meant to soothe, yet it echoed louder than any explanation. In those lines of cold type, the silence of her suffering was sealed. History had buried her twice, first in earth, then in a mission. There were hints, subtle as shadows, faint marks, the kind that tell stories without words. They were not catalogued in official documents, not spoken aloud in polite conversation. Yet for those willing to look, they whispered of fear, of restraint, of a body forced into compliance against its will. Was it a heart too young and tender, broken by pain, or a mind overwhelmed by terror, collapsing beneath the weight of ritual and expectation? Some whispered of physical trauma, cleverly hidden beneath the guise of intimacy. Others suggested that her death was born from shock, a fright so complete it silenced lungs and stilled a heart. In corners of the village, older women murmured of rites performed in secrecy, customs that demanded obedience, and penalties invisible to the law. Science and superstition collided here, neither willing to name what truly happened. The room where she lay became a shrine of unanswered questions. Candles flickered, and shadows crept along the walls, as if her presence lingered, waiting for the truth to be spoken. Friends and family spoke of a fragile constitution, of nerves overwhelmed, of fate cruel yet impartial, but each explanation felt hollow, a thin veil over something darker, something unspoken, yet unmistakable. Her death remained suspended between what was known and what was feared. The doctor's pens wrote words that comforted, while the heart that beat no more held secrets it would take to the grave. Did her heart stop from pain, or from knowing no one would ever believe her? In that stillness, she became more than a body. She was a testament to silence, a witness to rituals disguised as devotion, and a reminder that cruelty often hides behind tradition, just beyond the reach of investigation. The autopsy could never speak the language of fear, nor could the records hold the weight of her terror, and so she remained voiceless, yet eloquent, a haunting truth that no report could ever erase. Long after the last guests had left, long after the candles had guttered and the bed lay cold, a story began to grow. At first, it was whispers among the servants, doors that opened on their own, fleeting shadows at the edge of the hall. Then it seeped into the village. The bride's spirit lingered, some said, unwilling to leave the place where joy had twisted into horror. Some say she never left the room. Others say the screams still echo on quiet nights. The groom's family, once untouchable, began to falter. Misfortune clung to them like a stain. Business deals failed, crops withered, arguments erupted at the smallest provocation. Guests who once praised their wealth now hesitated at the gates, sensing something unspoken, some invisible weight pressing down upon the house. It was as if the very walls remembered, and the living were powerless to ignore it. Inside the house, the old wedding portraits began to fade. Candles extinguished themselves without wind. Silverware trembled in cupboards. People claimed that even laughter could not survive the quiet rooms, that footsteps belonged to someone who had long ceased to walk among the living. And yet, there was no corpse to see, no face to blame, only the memory, vivid and cold, that refused to rest. Locals told stories to children, warning them of the house at the end of the lane. The bride still waits, they would say, and she does not forgive. Tourists who stayed for the night described a chill in the air that no fire could warm, a pressure on the chest, a feeling of eyes watching from behind closed doors. The line between ghost and guilt blurred. Whether it was her spirit or the family's conscience manifesting, no one could say for certain. Time passed, but the legend grew stronger. Marriages in the village were spoken of with caution. No one dared mention her name openly, yet everyone knew. In the evenings, when lamps burned low and shadows grew long, whispers rose from rooms once meant for celebration. Some claimed to hear her voice, soft but insistent, reminding the world that what happened could not be forgotten. No matter how loudly the living tried to pretend it had, the contrast was clear. The family tried to erase her. The village tried to forget her, yet the dead remembered. Their silence became her language. Their fear became her echo. Even now, the wedding table, polished and prepared for ceremonies, holds a weight that cannot be measured, a presence that cannot be ignored. Some say she haunts only the house. Others say her influence stretches beyond its walls, touching the lives of those who profit from silence. The living forget, but the dead remember, and in that remembering, she lingers. a quiet, relentless reminder of what was stolen and what refuses to be buried. Her story did not end with a closed coffin or a whispered apology. It echoes today in lives constrained by the same rules that once bound her. Forced marriages continue in quiet corners of the world, cloaked in tradition, honor, or family pride. Young women still vanish behind doors that promise union but deliver fear. Abuse persists in families, communities, even institutions that claim to protect. The silence that allowed her death to go unquestioned is not gone. It has merely changed names. Across the globe, countless voices are stifled by expectation. A daughter told to obey, a wife told to endure, a community told to look away. Modern society prides itself on progress, yet cruelty persists under subtler guises. Social pressure, economic dependence, cultural shame. The bride's plight, though centuries old, mirrors the struggles faced by those who cannot speak without risking everything. Her death is not an isolated tragedy. It is part of a cycle, a pattern that repeats wherever authority goes unchecked and empathy is withheld. Contrast is everywhere. The world celebrates freedom and rights, yet still punishes those who resist. Some families still choose appearances over honesty, rituals over humanity. Institutions still silence victims. Laws may exist, but fear and tradition wield more power than statutes. And just as in her time, the consequences are hidden, denied, and often dismissed as fate. Remembering her is more than an act of mourning. It is a call to vigilance. Empathy is a weapon against silence. Accountability is a shield against cruelty. Every culture, every generation must confront the truth that ceremony alone does not sanctify, and that appearances can hide horrors. Her story asks us to recognize the cost of quiet complicity and to challenge it wherever it lingers. Even now, one can imagine her presence at the edge of every wedding, every ritual forced upon a trembling child, every act of obedience demanded in the name of tradition. The echo of her life, short, stolen, and silenced, reminds us that cruelty does not vanish with time. The walls may crumble, the candles may burn out, but the silence that allowed her death still persists in hearts and homes. She died once, but the silence that killed her never did, and so her story remains a warning and a memory, tragic yet necessary. It demands that we see, that we question, and that we act. The horror of her life and death transforms into purpose for those who listen, to honor the silenced, to challenge the hidden, to refuse the comforts of ignorance. When we remember her, we take a step toward breaking the empire of silence that has survived for centuries. Her life was brief, her suffering immense, but the lessons she leaves are eternal. Those who hear her story cannot unhear it, and in that knowledge lies the possibility of change. A world where no bride must die alone behind closed doors, and no silence can claim what is rightfully human.